What if the world's most powerful military alliance, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, joined a war between the United States and China? It's a scenario that would redefine global power, reshape alliances, and test the limits of modern warfare. This is not just a battle between two superpowers. This is the kind of conflict that could escalate into something far more dangerous, a global war. To understand what NATO's involvement would mean, we need to examine how such a war could start, what each side brings to the table, and what the consequences could be for the world. Tensions between the US and China have been building for years, over Taiwan, trade, the South China Sea, and emerging technologies. A conflict might begin with a Chinese attempt to reunify Taiwan by force, an invasion across the strait. If the United States responds militarily, honoring its commitment to Taiwan's defense, a full-scale war could erupt. At this point, NATO's involvement isn't automatic. After all, NATO is a collective defense pact focused on the North Atlantic, not the Indo-Pacific. But everything changes if China strikes a NATO ally, or if the conflict expands into cyberspace, outer space, or critical global trade routes. NATO is the most formidable military alliance in human history. It includes 31 countries across North America and Europe, led by the United States. Combined, NATO commands over 3 million active military personnel, thousands of fighter jets and warships, the world's most advanced intelligence and surveillance systems, and most notably, 3 nuclear powers, the US, the UK, and France. If NATO joins the war, it's not just a US-China conflict anymore. It becomes a showdown between the West and the East. China has rapidly modernized its military under the People's Liberation Army. It has the world's largest navy by number of ships, a vast arsenal of ballistic and hypersonic missiles, over 2 million active personnel, and growing nuclear capabilities. China also enjoys strong regional positioning, proximity to Taiwan, vast anti-access and area denial systems, and control over key trade routes in the South China Sea. With its Belt and Road Initiative, China has extended its influence into Europe, Africa, and beyond, possibly securing political support or neutrality from dozens of nations. But in a direct confrontation with NATO, China would face a global coalition with superior technology, combat experience, and overwhelming logistical support. If NATO fully commits to war, the battlefront would stretch across continents. In the Pacific, NATO navies would support the US in defending Taiwan, blockading Chinese ports, and targeting PLA bases. In Europe, NATO would secure its eastern flank in case Russia exploits the chaos to advance in Ukraine or threaten the Baltic states. In the Arctic, NATO would likely confront Chinese and Russian interests as climate change opens up new strategic routes. And in cyberspace, global infrastructure would be under constant attack, from satellites to internet cables to power grids. This is not a regional war. It's a multi-domain, worldwide conflict. With both sides possessing nuclear weapons, the risk of escalation is real. NATO's nuclear umbrella is vast, including over 6,000 US warheads and smaller arsenals in France and the UK. China, while having fewer nukes, estimated around 500, has a declared policy of no first use. But in the fog of war, intentions can be misread. If NATO strikes mainland China, or if China targets US bases in Europe, the line between conventional and nuclear war could blur fast. The world has not seen a nuclear exchange, but in this scenario, it would be a constant threat hanging over every military and political decision. A US-China war with NATO involved would force every other major power to choose a side, or scramble to stay out. Russia, already hostile to NATO, might side with China, opening a second front in Eastern Europe. India might lean toward the West, due to its own tensions with China, but would tread carefully. Japan, South Korea, and Australia, longtime US allies, would likely offer direct military support. Meanwhile, countries like Iran, Pakistan, or North Korea might exploit the chaos for regional gain. The global economy would unravel. Oil prices would skyrocket. Global trade could collapse. Supply chains would freeze, and billions of lives would be affected, even in countries far from the battlefield. In the end, no side could truly win a war of this scale. Even if NATO and the US prevail militarily, the cost in lives, economies, and environmental damage would be catastrophic. China, if defeated, would face isolation, sanctions, and domestic upheaval. But if it holds territory or pushes NATO to a standstill, it could emerge more powerful than ever. The more likely scenario? A negotiated ceasefire after months or years of brutal fighting, leaving the world changed forever. A war between the United States and China is already a terrifying thought. But a war that pulls in NATO, that's not just a great power rivalry. That's a world war. And in the age of nuclear weapons, cyber warfare, and space-based weapons, it's a war humanity might not survive. Let's hope this remains only a scenario and not a headline.